Welcome to the Holy Post. There's no way to deny that our culture's posture toward our faith is changing. Some now say America is post-Christian, but author Aaron Renn believes it's downright anti-Christian. In a recent New York Times profile, Renn explains why he calls this new era a negative world for our faith, and why winsome approaches of leaders like Tim Keller need to be abandoned. Then Phil talks with legendary musician, songwriter, and producer Charlie Peacock about his new memoir, Roots and Rhythm, A Life in Music. Also this week, a leaked memo reveals the real impact of Trump's foreign aid cuts and immigration policy, and what exhibits would you add to a museum of failure? Before we get started, it's not too late to buy your tickets for our Philadelphia show this Saturday with Shane Claiborne. Also, be on the lookout for future Holy Post media events this spring in LA, Washington, D.C., and Detroit. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay in the loop. Finally, for Holy Post Plus subscribers, we now have exclusive content being posted almost every day. Honestly, if this podcast is all that you engage, you're like standing in the foyer of a giant Holy Post media mansion for you to explore. So right now, sign up and you'll get access to all that content, including a bonus interview that Phil has done with Charlie Peacock, where he reflects on the rise of intolerance and authoritarianism in some parts of the American church. Peacock talks about how this is a reoccurring pattern in church history and why he emphasizes the need for authentic community, storytelling, and daily spiritual practices to model genuine, humble faith in Jesus. It's a fantastic listen, but it's exclusively for Holy Post Plus subscribers. So you can get that interview and access to everything else in this giant mansion of content by going to holypost.com and signing up today. All right, here is episode 660.
Hi there. I'm Phil. Welcome to the Holy Post podcast. I am here with Skye Jitani.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, who's staring at things that Caitlin Chess is pulling up on her laptop, which I imagine the class will not be told about. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Phil.
What are you researching?
The song you were just singing.
All the Young Dudes. What is it? Who's it by? English singer-songwriter. David Bowie. It's a Bowie song.
It's a Bowie song.
It's a
Wow.
Bowie song.
These are the important, serious conversations we have before we start recording.
Yes, sometimes as we're starting to record, and we have to resolve them after we've recorded. And now the theme song.
What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Caitlin.
This episode is sponsored in part by World Relief. On the show, we've been talking a lot about cuts in government funding for refugee resettlement programs and other life-saving work done by organizations like World Relief. If you missed our January 29th episode with Matthew Sorens, World Relief's VP of Advocacy and Policy, I encourage you to listen for a deeper dive into these heartbreaking developments. Here's the bottom line. Funding for the initial resettlement of nearly 4,000 refugees currently in the U.S. in World Relief's care has been cut, and funding for millions in need of life-saving programs in Sudan, South Sudan, Haiti, and the DRC has been paused, with no clear indication of whether it will resume. This impacts the most basic assistance like food, shelter, and medical care, and lives are being lost even today as a result. Right now, head to worldrelief.org/stand and join The Path, World Relief's monthly giving community, to provide consistent, reliable support that fuels life-saving work when and where it's most needed. Let's stand in the gap and be the church. Go to worldrelief.org/stand and become a monthly partner today. Today's episode is sponsored by Bushnell University. Do you want to lead faithfully in a chaotic world? Bushnell University's Masters of Arts in Theology and Culture is designed to equip Christians, pastors, ministry leaders, and workplace believers to be transformative in their communities. Guided by Dr. A.J. Swoboda. You may recognize him from episode 454 when he talked to Skye about deconstruction and doubt. Dr. Swoboda guides this 2-year program that blends deep theological formation education with practical learning. With 2 immersive week-long residencies and flexible online coursework, you'll learn how to be resilient and lead others into deeper faith. Learn more at bushnell.edu and start your journey today. That's bushnell.edu. Hi, guys.
Hi.
How are you?
Great.
Good. Good. Life is normal. Everything's normal. Nothing unusual happening. That's cool. And how about you all at home? Everything normal? Everything fine? Nothing unusual happening?
I feel like we're being set up.
Yeah.
Good.
What are we supposed to say?
I don't know. I'm not setting you up for anything.
Okay. We got a little
Except
nervous
that we
there.
live in unusual times. A new museum of failure was going to open in San Francisco.
No.
But it appears to be failing.
No.
Yes.
Is this like a performance art thing?
Yeah, seriously. That's what I was going to ask.
Samuel West had the idea to open a international touring exhibit on failure. And he acquired a number of items that are considered failures, like a Ford Edsel or a can of Crystal Pepsi, things that are famous for failing. And then he had a partner who was going to help him take it out internationally so he could make money on it. And the partnership has dissolved into acrimony. The
Good.
partner is attempting to open the latest version of the Museum of Failure in San Francisco. And the founder is trying to get people not to buy tickets so that it will fail.
This is like the producers.
Yeah. It is a little bit. You want to explain why it's like the producers? Because Caitlin
I have no idea.
Sure doesn't know.
Oh, it's a Mel Brooks movie about these producers.
They've realized they
No.
can make more money by raising money for a show that fails opening night.
A Broadway show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
and it's
you.
a scam.
And
It's a
the
scam.
show they come up with is called Springtime for Hitler.
Yeah. It's trying
Oh
to
my gosh.
come up with, it's a Mel
What's
Brooks.
the worst possible idea for a musical you
Yeah,
can come up
yeah,
with? But it
that
ends up being a
sounds
huge
bad.
hit.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
And so their whole scheme falls apart as a result.
So this is going to be opposite
So it's
of that.
kind of like
Right,
that.
right.
So what do you do if you fail at your dream of opening a museum dedicated to failure?
Yeah,
do
where do
you
you-
celebrate? Do you put yourself in your museum?
Yeah, this could get real meta.
It could.
I wonder if they're taking suggestions. Like we could all recommend things
That should
as
fail?
that-
that should be exhibited.
Oh,
Exhibited?
that are
Yeah.
failures.
What would you throw in? What's your what immediately comes to your mind?
Oh, I don't. Probably things I shouldn't talk about.
Oh, okay.
Try us.
I have a list of names of Christian leaders.
People.
Oh, no.
We're not saying
No.
products. Think
Oh,
of products
okay.
that are famous failures. I would put in the movie Ishtar, which I actually love, but it
Yeah.
absolutely flopped. And
Dustin Hoffman.
Dustin Hoffman and Beatty.
Warren Beatty.
Warren Beatty. And it's
Yeah.
hilarious. It's hilarious. Highly recommend to give it a try. But huge flop. So such a huge flop that years later, when Kevin Costner made Waterworld, and it was the most expensive movie ever made, and it was a huge flop, it was nicknamed Fish Tar. Did it?
I get it.
Yeah. So it's become shorthand. What is?
It was just, I get it.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
That was tough.
I don't know
but
what's
figured
going
it
on
out.
here, so.
I think maybe that's enough about the Museum of Failure.
Well,
See-
I
Yeah?
looked this up while you were talking about it.
Yeah.
I like that the guy said, the Museum of Failure is a failure. The irony isn't lost on me, but it's shameful that it's me.
I do quibble with one thing.
Yeah.
course.
Crystal Pepsi
Yeah.
was not really a failure.
Really?
Yeah.
Did it work?
It
Where
worked.
did it go? What
It-
about New
well-
Coke? Should New Coke be
Well,
the-
no. The story behind it, and I read this a while ago, and I was going to use it like in a sermon illustration. Never got around to it, so it's in my archive somewhere. I might get some of these details slightly
Is
off.
that what you call your brain these days?
Yeah, my archives. So, Crystal Pepsi was doing super well, and it was all gimmicky. This is back
Yeah.
in the 90s.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm familiar.
It was
yeah.
clear Pepsi. You
Yeah.
thought
Yeah,
you were
yeah, yeah.
drinking 7-Up.
So,
I got it.
But it was
Coke
Pepsi.
decided that the best way to derail Crystal Pepsi is they created their own crystal.
Meth?
It was their own crystal soda, but they deliberately made it taste awful.
Really?
Yeah.
So people would
So
associate it
people
with
would
awful
associate
tasting.
the clear soda
This sounds
with bad
smart.
taste, and they just destroyed the whole category.
And they weren't worrying about killing Sprite in the process?
I don't know whether it's something weird, like, but it was a fascinating marketing tactic. It was rather than compete directly with something that's working, let's undermine it by making it so undesirable that it fails. We're going to lose, but not as much as they will. And it was some weird tactic like that.
Coca-Cola bottlers just thought, oh, we are totally fine with this plan. We will start bottling something that tastes terrible, and we will take the hit on our bottom lines so that
ultimately,
cola wars are vicious, man. It was vicious.
I'm skeptical.
I love the drama.
I will look it up after the episode, Phil.
I think Jerry Seinfeld should make a movie with Netflix money telling the story of Crystal
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Okay. What's going on? I don't want to have to keep track of what's going on, but I'm also very concerned at the number of Christian leaders who have said, seemingly without equivocation, that God saved Donald Trump's life specifically for this moment, and that what we are in is a movement of God. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things that we've learned in the last week or so. I don't know if I talked about it on the podcast, but I talked about it on Twitter, and it went major viral on Twitter. The story of the 27-year-old woman from Iran. Yeah, I did talk about that, didn't I? Who got stuck in the jungle in Panama because she can't go back to Iran because she converted to Christianity. Well, Panama just got tired of taking care of these people in the jungle and all the bad press they were getting. So they just announced they're releasing all of them, releasing them into Panama. And they can go wherever they want and do whatever they want to do. It's not Panama's business anymore. They're not being given any money. They're not being given plane tickets to go anywhere else. They're just going to be wandering around Panama homeless. So that's where our young woman, I don't have her name, a 27-year-old school teacher from Iran who can't go back to Iran because of a death warrant, and wanted to come to the U.S. as a persecuted Christian to seek asylum. She's now homeless on the streets of Panama City. Okay, that's one update. The Trump administration has ended reimbursements for Illinois food programs. We had programs in Illinois, this was just announced, where local farmers were paid to raise a certain amount of fresh produce that would then be distributed through food pantries. And this was, in some counties in Illinois, the only source of fresh produce for poor rural Illinoisans. A lot of people have said, when I've pointed out that we've cut, for example, emergency nutritional support for African children, that we should be spending that money on American children or Americans, and that's what Trump is doing. He's saying, no more money for Africa, use the money for poor Americans. Well, now we're cutting the money to feed poor Americans, so it doesn't seem as much like we only want to feed Americans. It seems like we don't want to feed anyone.
Well, we only want to feed the real Americans.
But there's rural Americans. These are real Americans.
I think they need to prove their loyalty.
These are rural. This is red counties. These are the counties in Illinois that want to leave and join Indiana.
If they were real Americans, they wouldn't be poor, Phil.
All right. On top of that, it has been forecast, memos were circulated inside USAID estimating the impact of the cuts that are currently happening. It was estimated that up to 18 million additional cases of malaria we will have every year, as many as 166,000 additional malaria deaths. It's estimated that we will have an additional 200,000 children paralyzed with polio every year, and hundreds of millions of additional polio infections. It's estimated that 1 million children will not be treated for severe acute malnutrition, which is often fatal each year. And that we'll have at least 28,000 new cases of infectious diseases like Ebola as a result of the cuts in funding. What was the response? This was leaked. The memos, the internal memos were leaked. New York Times got a hold of them. The administration's response
was, you can't make America great without breaking a few children.
No. No, the person who wrote the memo has been put on administrative leave. He's no longer...
Shoot the messenger.
Yeah.
The bad news is not okay.
Yeah. I really have a problem with the amount of justification that's going on for why we still want to stay with our premise that this is an act of God, that what's happening is God moving in world history. Because if this is what God wants, if this was what he was after, I've got some issues.
The other side of it, and we talked about this in that short video I did a few weeks ago, but if you really want to cut abuse and waste in the government, there are so many better ways to do it than these relatively tiny programs that are helping the poor around the world. There is so much waste and abuse in the military budget, and no one's crying about that. But yeah, let's take away malaria nets and AIDS medicine from the poorest people in the world because it's going to save each American 5 cents?
Yeah.
Less than.
Less than?
Yeah.
This is the danger with identifying any political movement or leader with God's direction or will. I mean, this is why I think under almost every circumstance, you might be able to, with a lot of humility and care, identify the way God was working in human history in the past. That still can often be judgments that are hard to make. But in the present, it's almost impossible. Sometimes it can happen that you can really feel like, no, I feel like the Spirit is moving in this very limited way or in this very particular community. But to make judgments about who God is on, whose side God is on, or what God is doing, especially when it comes to national politics, not only is a judgment that I think is really beyond human capacity to make, but also, your point, Phil, it puts people in the position where once they've made that judgment, they don't have to think anymore about the kind of moral judgments they need to make about decisions that leader makes or that happen as consequences of whatever movement or event they identified as the will of God. That they don't have to think anymore. I mean, we're looking for that for the most part. We're looking for justifications to just support someone without having to make any moral judgments or having to think for ourselves or having to change our minds if something changes that should make us change our minds.
Tribalism is a lot easier than real wisdom.
Yeah.
So here's what these policies actually look like. Hayatollah Omar, a 29-year-old who fled Afghanistan in 2022 after the Taliban took control, is now in legal limbo as he's been released from detention in Panama City and given 30 days to leave Panama. They have to leave in 30 days. He's scrambling to find a path forward. He was quoted by the Associated Press saying, "We're refugees. We do not have money. We cannot pay for a hotel in Panama City. We do not have relatives." He told the Associated Press, "I can't go back to Afghanistan under any circumstances. It is under the control of the Taliban and they want to kill me. How can I go back?" So he is stuck like so many others. And quite a few of them did return to their home countries, but they weren't sent there by the U.S. It was the UN had to step in and fly them back. The ones that could return. The ones that were left behind are the ones who can't return for reasons of their own peril, which is exactly why you are under international law allowed to seek asylum in other countries, which they were trying to do in the US, but they were put in shackles, put on a military plane, by the way, which costs more to fly a person than a chartered commercial plane, but it was for a photo op so they could make an ASMR video of the sounds of migrants walking in shackles so we could enjoy listening to it, and then dumped in Panama.
Okay. Obviously, I'm not condoning any of this.
I'm cranky,
I know,
Sky.
But I think there is a legitimate argument to be made that the asylum policies of the United States need reform.
Yeah.
And I think
who is saying they don't?
I know. Hold on.
Okay.
And the other argument is, yes, of course, this young man, for example, should not be returned to Afghanistan because his life is at risk, and he should have a right to leave and seek asylum somewhere else. The argument coming from some on the right, which I also think has some legitimacy, is why does that asylum need to land in the United States? Right? There are other options. There are other places.
Sure.
So there needs to be some kind of judicious way of having compassion for these people that are escaping genuine threats without saying everyone automatically gets into the United States. There are other places they could go. So all that needs to be reformed. But the way this administration is going about doing it is the least humane.
Nothing they're doing is about reforming.
Exactly.
When you're standing on stage with a chainsaw, it doesn't feel like reform is the metaphor you're going for.
I know, but this is also part of the fruit of having had calls for reform for a while.
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party not stepping up as a mature people and doing what needed. I mean,
Who canned the last attempt to reform?
I know there was a really legitimate option on the table when Biden was president that he supported, that the Republicans in Congress
the Gang of Eight?
I know, I get it. But like, this is what's so cynical and perverse about what the Republican Party has become, is they destroy every legitimate attempt at reform. And then when the system is thoroughly broken, they cry about how broken the system is, which then justifies their inhumane and cruel behavior towards those that are impacted by their policy at the end of it. So yeah, it's all gross and cynical, but this is why we need wise people of character in leadership, in the government, who have a humane, empathetic impulse that want rational reform that doesn't destroy people.
And we have to be the kind of people who actually help create the right incentive structure for politicians to actually get things done.
Yes.
We feed into this problem by being obsessed with the sound bites and the reality TV-ification of our political system, such that it benefits a lot of politicians for nothing to actually change, because they get to still be on the soapbox they've been on.
And the systemic problem here beyond the media is the gerrymandering of our districts means if you are in Congress, chances are you're not going to be defeated by someone of the other party. You're more likely to be defeated by someone on the extreme flank of your own party, which creates more and more incentive to the extreme right or left.
So why do so many people from all over the world want to come to America? Why do they think America is a friendly big brother that will welcome you in? Because that's what we said for about 70 years during the Cold War, so that we would win the hearts and minds of the entire world so they wouldn't turn to communism. So we set ourselves up as the friendly big brother that will welcome you in and let you try your hand at the American dream. You know, which kind of was manifest most explicitly by Reagan in some of his speeches, where it's like, we're all about immigrants. You know, we were built by immigrants. We love immigrants. That's the strength of our country. And since 1990, our undocumented immigrant population has roughly quintupled. So that worked. That message worked.
And there was, of course, economic opportunities here.
Yeah, huge economic opportunities. So the message worked. Now we're mad at all those people for believing us. Like, you took that seriously? You actually thought we wanted you to come here? And now that there's no Cold War, now that there's no Soviet Union, not only do we not want to save you from them, but actually we like them better than we like you.
You know, in a weird way, it might work. We had a norovirus go through our house recently, which is like very contagious and horrible. And normally our home is like Grand Central Station for everybody, like teenagers and people are at our house all the time.
Are you having trouble with illegal immigrants?
No, but like, it's interesting when someone hears that norovirus is going through a house, it's like, no one wants to go there. And Trump is almost like the norovirus of America. Yeah. Like, he is so gross and disgusting that the rest of the world is going, yeah, we used to want to come there. We're not coming anymore because you guys got a whole bad thing going.
Canada. Can we? We like Canada.
I had a conversation, this is years ago, but I had a conversation with a young person overseas. I won't get into specifics. And he was about to go to college. And I asked him, where are you thinking about going? And most people in his community go overseas to college. And he mentioned Australia and he mentioned Singapore and he mentioned Europe. And I said, well, you're not looking at any schools in the United States? And he's like, oh no. And I said, why not? And a lot of his family members over the past had come to the United States. And he said, well, it's pretty obvious to me that you guys have a lot of guns and are killing people and you really don't like brown people anymore. So I'm not interested in, and this is like how
many years ago was this?
This would have been during the first Trump term.
Oh, okay.
And so here's a brilliant, intelligent, productive young person who's likely to have a very flourishing future and a benefit to whatever country they land in. And their perception as an outsider was, America is no longer a hospitable place for people like me. Yeah. I'm not even considering going there. And there's a brain drain that happens when the smartest immigrants in the world don't want to come to your country.
The good news is crossings at the southern border are at historic lows. People just don't seem to want to come.
That's it.
And that's exactly what we wanted.
That's the norovirus.
We want people to not want to come here so that we can have all the stuff. Because we don't believe that people actually grow economies anymore. We think wealth grows economies, and people take away your wealth. Imagine if there were no people living in the US at all. Imagine how wealthy we'd be.
Right.
Wow, it boggles the mind.
Yeah, they've lost sight of the fact that the only way to have a growing economy is to have a growing population. And if you ain't having enough
Right.
babies, you got to
Right.
get those people from somewhere.
Okay.
Right.
But Christians really shouldn't want to come here, should they? Because this is no longer a positive world for Christians. Isn't that correct? It used to be what we call a positive world in America.
And then Caitlin was born.
And then Caitlin,
It was her birth year that everything went south.
Apparently.
we became neutral.
Neutral.
Okay.
Not
well,
negative.
but it was
Yes.
a turn. It was
Yeah.
a turn.
I just cooled things down.
It's like, wow, that really takes it down a notch. Aaron Renn is a Christian thinker who has coined a concept that has taken off on the Christian New Right. And I actually bumped into this, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, right when it came out. But the New York Times just discovered it and decided it was a big enough thing that it deserved a feature story, and sending someone out to Carmel, Indiana to sit down with Aaron Renn and talk to him at length.
Ruth Graham.
Ruth Graham, our very own Ruth Graham from Wheaton College. So Mr. Renn's thoughts are straightforward. Modern American history, he argues, can be divided into 3 epochs.
Epochs.
Epoch.
Is it epoch?
Epochs?
Epics?
We have had this exact conversation before, and I still don't know the answer.
Epoch.
Epic?
Epoch.
I think it's epic,
Mike, look
but
it up.
I think it should be epoch.
Because epic is EPIC.
Right, it's confusing.
Yeah.
But I do think it's
I'm going to say epoch. I'm going to mix them.
epoch.
Or epoch. Modern American history, he argues, can be divided into 3 eras when it comes to the status of Christianity. In positive world, between 1964 and 1994. It's nice to know.
We still were talking about this earlier. What happened before 1964? What kind of world was that?
It's in the book, not his article.
Yeah, it was-
but he has
what
some
was
reasons
it?
why 64 kind of precipitated the eventual cooling
60?
into neutrality.
But that was the beginning of positive world.
Yeah, but I think it was him trying to say, like, this is the last era of positive worlds.
Okay.
Oh,
But define the positive world.
I was going to, and then you interrupted
Sorry.
me. Being a Christian in America generally enhanced one's social status. Okay, when I was born in 1966, and as a baby, I gave my life to Jesus, I was immediately given things by my society. I was given the key to the city of Muscatine, Iowa. I was elevated. I was put on the city council as an infant. I did my best. I did not always show up on time or awake.
But the basic argument is being a Christian was a social positive.
A social positive, yes.
Right.
It generally enhanced one's social status. It was a good
Which is
thing.
why I follow Jesus.
It was, which is exactly why, to go back even earlier, Benjamin Franklin was a paid member of, I think, 3 different churches.
Even though he was not an Orthodox Christian.
No, he was not a Christian.
Right. Yeah.
But he said it was good for his printing business.
Yeah, it's good for business.
It's good for business. It was a good thing to be known as a churchgoer, and Christian moral norms were the basic norms of the broader American culture. Then in neutral world, that's where you were born. That's why, you're kind of so,
She's wearing
I don't
neutrals
know.
today.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it here? What'd you come up with, Mike?
This won't surprise you. The internet is divided.
Oh,
So I'm right. It's epoch.
Google says epoch, but a lot of commenters are saying it's epoch.
Epoch.
Epoch. Okay. Epoch Shakur.
That's Tupac.
Okay. It was then in neutral world, which lasted roughly until 2014. I think we all know that.
Roughly.
We all remember.
Just happens to be
Ah.
2014.
Remember that moment in 2014 where neutral world ended. Christianity no longer had a privileged status, but it was seen as one of many valid options in a pluralist public square.
Mm-hmm.
See, the first time I read this, I'm reading it more in depth. I'm saying, okay, I see where he's coming from.
Mhm.
But I grew up in a subculture of Christianity that was constantly being told the culture hated us.
Right.
Constantly being told.
In the 70s.
Pre-2014.
Yeah, in the
Yeah.
70s
Right, yeah.
and 80s.
Right.
When I was in the 90s, when I was in my 90s, I worked in the world of advertising in Chicago. I would never bring up the fact that I was an evangelical Christian.
Right.
Working in advertising
Yeah.
in Chicago, because people would look at you like, I don't know, do I want to work with you on this project?
I was a college student in that era, and it was not easy on a big secular college campus to come out as a Christian. It was much easier to come out as gay, honestly, on that campus in some ways than it was to come out as a Christian. And that was in the 90s. That was supposed to be in the good / positive neutral time.
Back to our story. About a decade ago, around the time that the Supreme Court's ruling in Obergefell versus Hodges made same-sex marriage legal nationwide, coincidence? That's the end of neutral world?
This is going to get into my analysis here.
Oh.
The United States became negative world.
Mm-hmm.
Negative world. It's like a video game when you get to a level where everything's dark and rusted.
Yeah, it's when you go down the pipe in Super Mario Land.
Yeah. Being a Christian, especially in high status domains, and we all try to travel in high status domains, is a social negative, he argues, and holding to traditional Christian moral views, particularly related to sex and gender. Bada boom, bada bing, bada bam.
There it
is seen as, quote,
I think that's the point.
a threat to the public good and new public moral order. So, as one example, Mr. Renn shares a story of Crossing, a large evangelical church in Columbia, Missouri, that sponsored and supported a local secular film festival for years. But when a pastor at the church preached in 2019 that God is not pleased when we blur genders, the film festival bowed to the community outcry and cut those ties. So, this is the pattern, Mr. Renn says. Christians who hold traditional beliefs about a range of social and political issues have come to be treated as pariahs by secular elites, even if they have made an effort to avoid gratuitous offense. There is a dynamic where holding to, strict biblical morality makes you a pariah.
Sexual morality.
Yes.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yes.
I would not say broadly biblical morality.
When people complained
morality.
about this in the 1920s, it was atheists saying Christians cannot be allowed, shouldn't be in high positions of decision making because they have crazy backwards beliefs. And you have, the monkey trials, and you have H.L. Mencken, writing about Christians as yahoos and know-nothings.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a legit, we kind of forget that there was that much hostility from elites, from secular elites in the 1920s. And we were reacting. And part of that is what led to the withdrawing of fundamentalist Christians, and making all of our own Bible colleges and, publishing houses, is when we got kicked out of the academy, basically in the 1920s. So those people would not have said, we are living in positive world,
right,
where me being a conservative Christian gives me higher social value among elites. In the 1920s. No one would have said that. Now, maybe post-World War II, when we were getting into, Eisenhower and the height of the Cold War, and we were putting God in everything and on all of our money. And
that's part of his pajamas. 64 to 94.
Okay. Oh, it's 64 when we put God on it?
No, it was 50. In the 50s.
Yeah. No, but that's part of his,
64?
There was a
aftermath of that. It's more positive than
Christianity during the Cold War. Christianity in the United States had social cachet.
Yes.
Because it was a way of saying we are not godless atheists, communists.
Right.
Yes.
And
also, we are friendly to the whole world. Come on in if you enjoy our values. We were saying that at the same time.
Well, again, it was PR.
Yeah. Okay, Sky.
Okay.
I
think his argument works if you narrowly apply it to crotch Christianity, which is not a term I've used in a while.
Yeah, we haven't used that term in a while. I don't think we've used that term since Caitlin was born.
Really?
That's not true. That's not true.
Have we used it with you on the podcast?
Yeah.
We have a sticker. There's a sticker you can get on holypost.com.
Don't do that.
It's still there?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I don't know. So here's my definition of crotch Christianity. It's the view that what matters most to Christianity are the morals that involve your crotch. So gender, sexuality, abortion, all that kind of stuff.
Belly button to knees.
Yeah. And I'm not saying those things are not valid. They certainly are. But I contrast that with cosmic Christianity, which says the whole world matters, including one's crotch. It all does. But it's like, it just narrows it on
Can
this.
I quote you on that?
Yeah.
My crotch matters.
So what he appears to be saying, and this is where, again, I agree with him. Like, if you go back to the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, generally American culture said adultery is bad.
Yeah.
And it said sex outside of marriage is generally frowned upon. Not entirely, but in most places it was. It said same-sex relationships, homosexuality, or the definition of marriage had a more traditional Christian set of understandings. And yeah, in the modern era now, post 2014, all that's kind of up for grabs. So the culture's sexual ethics have certainly changed and departed from what they had been more aligned with Christianity. But I think if that's such a narrow sliver of Christian ethics, that to make that the entire definition of positivity or neutrality or negativity, I think is very myopic. And so let me give you an example.
Okay.
I'd agree that since 2014, this country, its views on the definition of marriage, sexual ethics, all that it's scattered. There's a great diversity, and those who hold traditional Christian values of sexuality and gender do face perhaps more criticism than they used to. But think about this. Let me give you a list of other Christian values and ethics, and tell me if you think our culture is more hostile.
Sky brought props. Sky came prepared.
Are these values more hostile in our culture, or if they are, in what part of our culture are they more hostile? Empathy, compassion, tolerance, equal rights, human dignity, charity, generosity, absolute truth, and the value of character. I would say all of those have actually declined in value among the very people that Renn is arguing are pro-Christian.
Okay.
And a lot of our culture, if you exhibit these things, are celebrated.
Yeah.
And they are core Christian values.
Okay.
One way to think about it is the left has changed its view of Christian sexual values.
Yeah.
And the right has abandoned Christian social ethics.
Yeah.
But maintains some degree of commitment to sexual ethics.
Yeah.
So it's not as clean as saying the whole country is departed from Christianity. Part of the country is departed from Christian sexual ethics. Absolutely. But that's not the whole enchilada of Christian ethics.
Okay. Oh, Caitlin has something to say.
I mean, I agree with you in the abstract, Sky,
Yeah.
but I also, and I have other criticisms of this approach that I would like to get into, but for a moment I will defend this like way of thinking about things, just in the sense that, one, I do think the changes when it comes to gender and sexuality have been so significant and so fast. And they don't, I think, actually just pertain to people's crotches. Like, this is also about how we view human relationships broadly, how we view the way that we navigate the world, and the kinds of relationships that we have.
Crotches,
I agree.
Sky.
Yes.
That was the next thing I was going to say.
Oh.
I do think, depending on the part of the country you are in and the circles you run in, some of this can seem more or less important. Like, if you're reading his view of this like positive, neutral, negative world, and you live just maybe, for example, in Wheaton, Illinois, your perception of how true that is might be different than if you live in San Francisco or Portland or Durham, North Carolina, where it's not only true that it does take on not a truly apocalyptic, which I think this tries to make it truly apocalyptic, but it can take on quite a much more serious tone when it does seem both like some things are happening that are very scary, that are happening very quickly. And I get frustrated with progressives who don't take seriously enough that this really deeply matters to people culturally, religiously, etc. And in a lot of those places, it's not just that there's been such a significant change when it comes to gender and sexuality. That has become the litmus test for if you are compassionate, empathetic, etc. So there's lots of places, and I think he points this out sometimes in ways that are exaggerated, sometimes in ways that are unhelpful, but I have seen this all over the place, where it actually doesn't even matter if you think about race well or you think about class well. It just matters if you kind of check the ideological checklist when it comes to just gender and sexuality. And so there are so many Christians who I think in some of those places want to care a lot about racial justice, want to care a lot about the poor, and can't build partnerships with other institutions or organizations, aren't taken seriously for the work that they're doing, are called bigoted and horrible and, lots of bad names just because of a handful of things that, to his point, they have tried to articulate as sensitively and compassionately as they can. And it doesn't matter. If you don't line up on this ideological checklist, you're a bigot and you're out. And that feels more catastrophic when you're in a place where it's like, I can't get anything done. I can't even serve my community in the ways I want to serve my community because of this change.
That makes sense. On the flip side, though, there are people that I think he would align himself with, that he does in this article, who hold to a traditional ethic of marriage or sexuality. And because that's what they hold to, they can abandon all the other Christian values, right? Cruelty is fine. discrimination, all this policies that Phil was talking about earlier, like all that is fine because you believe marriage is between a man and a woman.
Okay.
And it's like, it's not an either or decision
totally.
here. And that's what's bothering me about this, is because we've made these narrow set of things. As I'm not saying marriage doesn't matter or sexual ethics doesn't matter. They do, but that's all people see. Just like I was saying,
but it's true on both ends.
Crotch Christianity is part of the cosmos. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm saying it's not all that matters. And both sides, to your point, are saying, no. Sexuality, gender, and marriage is all that matters for liberals, and it's all that matters for conservatives. And I'm going, that is not the measure of Christian ethics.
Yeah. Right. But you're a Catholic foster care agency, and you're told you can no longer participate in the foster care system because you will not place kids with same-sex couples. So it becomes pretty real if you actually lose your ability to do work, having not changed your values.
Agreed.
One iota.
Agreed.
And it happened quickly.
Yes, it happened very quickly.
But now we're being told you cannot participate in government programs if you care about diversity.
Yeah, but you don't say this side isn't bad because this side is worse.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying both sides have too narrow a view of what Christian values are.
Okay.
So when he paints with this broad brushstroke of because the culture has shifted on sexuality and gender, that is a complete departure from Christianity, I'm going, no, it is a departure from Christianity. It's not a complete departure. And that's how he paints it. It's like before this, the culture was Christian. It was positive to Christianity. And now it's negative to Christianity. He goes, no, it was positive towards Christian sexual ethics. Now it's negative towards Christian sexual ethics. Christianity is bigger than sexual ethics. That's all I'm trying to say.
Is it though?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is. I do think it makes sense to read some of these big cultural changes through this lens of gender and sexuality because of what I said of like how huge it's been and how much it doesn't just deal with personal sexual ethics, the way it changes communities and the way that we raise children. And that like, I think, again, progressives have been too quick to just kind of shrug off concerns that people have about how their kids are educated, how their neighborhoods function. Like, I think it really matters. And I think this is a fairly fair read of kind of how some changes have happened because of the way that on both the right and the left, it's a litmus test. Like it does, everything else gets read through that. Where I think he's wrong is not just in kind of setting up these strict eras, which I think can get you in lots of trouble. How you define them and kind of making them too firm is problematic. But the biggest issue I have with this book, and it's not just his book, it's how it's been used and how the original First Things article was used, is that the crux of the argument, and this New York Times piece points this out, is not just is he right or not about living in a negative world. It's what does living in a negative world justify? Exactly. What does living in a negative world mean about how we should change our strategy? And I think he's totally right. And lots of other people have said this. I kind of got annoyed with this being like the first person to ever make this kind of argument. It's like, no, like you said, Phil, people have been saying for a long time, the culture's against you. The question is, how do you respond to that? And his response, and not just him, I think actually some of his interpreters have given even more kind of frightening responses than what he would say. But the response of we need to change strategy can in some sense be true, right? Christian ethics, Christian faith should be done contextually and in response to the particulars of the moment. And we shouldn't just have these like abstract ideals that float above the world. They should be lived out in particular circumstances. But what concerns me is that we're acting as though the things that need to be contextualized or strategic are the things like compassion and empathy and kindness to people who are different from us. It'd be one thing to say, hey, you live in a negative world, so you can't assume people share these values. So you should change how you talk about them. And you should change at what level of government do you actually want to get things done? You can't get certain things passed at a national level, so you try to get more local. Or you're probably not going to get that movie made that has a kind of traditional Christian sexual ethic, but can you have a conversation with your neighbor that kind of builds some common ground? Like that kind of changing of strategy I think is really important. And it's actually in the line of Tim Keller that he's critical of, to say like it depends on the context you're in, how you articulate what you're doing. It's the fact that we're suddenly acting as though essential Christian values should now be discarded because the moment that we're in does not demand them.
Because they're not essential in their view.
Yeah.
What's essential is sexuality, and what's non-essential is compassion and equal rights and diversity and compassion and justice and truth even. So that's exactly my point, is when you define the essence of Christianity as crotch Christianity, then victory means we've taken sexual minorities and pushed them back in the closet. Or we've defined marriages between a man and a woman. Yay, we've defended the kingdom of God, even though we've been total jerks and cruel, mean, bigoted, liars in the process, it's okay because winning for Jesus means winning on these sexual issues. And that's such a perverse and narrow view of things.
Yeah.
And to your point that we recorded earlier, like believing in Christianity and in the cross and in the resurrection means I pursue the way of Jesus, but I will not compromise on the ethics of Jesus to win. And what he's advocating is we need to fight fire with fire.
Right.
We're living in
Is he advocating that, or is that his, because he describes himself as centrist, but he's hanging out with more and more, new right figures.
Well, he's contrasting himself with Tim Keller, and Tim Keller took the quote unquote winsome approach. And he's like, we can't be winsome anymore.
I was going to say the real casualty in all this is the reputation of Tim Keller,
Right?
Because this crowd, the young, restless, reformed crowd, were huge Tim Keller fans because he was an intellectual giant, and he was taking it right to New York City, and he was building a vibrant church in a godless, secular area, and he was a fantastic Bible teacher, and he was holding to complementarianism. He was holding to traditional Christian ethics as that group understood them. But he said, I can reach out and I can be successful with the gospel message in a hostile environment by being winsome, by being pleasant and kind, and by smiling.
And being respectful of those who disagree with me.
Being respectful of differences.
Yeah.
And that has now become a pejorative.
Exactly.
To say, oh, you're winsome. I get it. So you won't stand up for the truth.
Winsome means weak to them.
Yeah. The idea is that Tim Keller was a product of a positive world.
Yeah.
And he outlived his usefulness because we're no longer in a positive world. And he was too fond of the adulation of the Atlantic and the New York Times to stand up and say what was right and wrong about our culture.
And yet he did.
He did.
That's the irony, is he didn't back down on his convictions. He just presented it in a way that more people were able to receive and hear. So because he wasn't belligerent and nasty and mean and demonizing of those who disagreed with him, people somehow think that that's weak and a failure.
Well, I think you're overstating that a little bit. I don't think anyone was calling on Tim Keller to be nasty and mean.
No, but they're saying we need to not worry about being winsome anymore.
Yes, we need to not worry about being perceived as nice. I have heard people say that.
Yeah. And I think actually some of what people loved about Tim Keller was confused. Like, I think they said, I love his approach, or I love his theology, and in reality, part of what we've lost, perhaps, is that you can become a famous pastor with a lot of people at your church and have New York Times bestselling books and hold to a historic Christian sexual ethic. That time might have changed. Like, that might become increasingly difficult. But if that's what you thought was important and valuable about Tim Keller, or that's what makes a successful pastor or ministry, that was a wrong standard of success.
It is interesting because our friend Megan Basham was asked on Twitter, who is going to fill the intellectual shoes of Tim Keller for the next generation of young men, that used to look up to Tim Keller. And her answer is, it looks like right now it's Doug Wilson, the very controversial pastor from Moscow, Idaho, who describes himself as a paleo-Confederate apologist. So it's the manosphere type of Christian leader that, is ultra conservative, ultra masculine. I mean, Doug Wilson makes videos where he takes a flamethrower to things while smoking cigars.
And talks about how slavery wasn't that bad.
Yeah, because it created great affection between the races. So if that's the solution to winsome doesn't work anymore, then, well, actually that's what we're seeing, because you see J.D. Vance quoting these guys.
Right.
J.D. Vance is swimming in the waters. The Secretary of Defense goes to a Doug Wilson affiliated church. So we're seeing the impact of the rejection of Tim Keller's view of Christianity in Washington, D.C., in the Trump administration right now.
The part I just don't get.
Yes, Sky.
Is
why? There only one part?
Well, no, but this is the part on my mind right now. The part I don't get is we're not called to mimic Tim Keller, and we're not called to mimic Doug Wilson or Aaron Renn, or whatever. We're called to be disciples, followers of Jesus.
So pick the Jesus that most resembles the person you want to be like. So I like the Jesus with the whip. That's like a Doug Wilson Jesus. That's who I'm going to be.
And the Jesus we're called to emulate is the one that's revealed to us in the Gospels.
He has a whip in the Gospels.
The whole gospel, not just a scene or chapter. And so that means holding to the sexual ethic of Jesus. That means holding to the stubborn convictions of Jesus when he's being criticized by everybody. But it also means compassion and empathy and loving your enemy and turning the other cheek and all these other teachings of Jesus, whether in the Sermon on the Mount or elsewhere. And I don't understand why it's so controversial to say, as a follower of Jesus, you need to follow the whole Jesus rather than just pick one piece or another. Like, I don't think we should have to choose between the sexual ethics of the Christian faith and the social ethics of the Christian faith. I think they can go together. And that feels like what's being split apart here in an unnatural way.
Okay. All right. Last word goes to Caitlin because she's wearing a high quality sweater.
Thank you.
As Esau McCauley said earlier today.
I think what's important to take from some of this is part of the challenge of figuring out what we're supposed to do in whatever context we're particularly in. When we have the internet and we have famous Christian authors and we have podcasts that we listen to, is that we assume this one person's perspective can make sense of the entire world that I'm living in. When, as I said earlier, how you might think about how Christianity is received, how you might think about sexual ethics, how you might think about what possibilities there are for political change are very different depending on the part of the country that you are in, depending on the particular city that you're in and who's on the city council. And I think it would just benefit a lot of us to sometimes read these books and listen to podcasts and be on the internet very occasionally and see what people are saying, but to really just do the work. Like, the best part of this book is someone trying to say, we need to pay attention to the particular time that we're in. What are the signs that help us understand? Like, what is possible and what is not possible? How should we respond? How should we incarnate in a particular way, these universal truths of how Christians should act? It will always involve compassion and empathy and human dignity, but strategically, how we might respond, the policies we might support, the conversations we might have, those will be different. It would benefit all of us to say, I'm not going to take my cues on how to do that from Twitter or from a podcast or from a book written by someone who doesn't understand my particular place. I'm going to read scripture. I'm going to have conversations with other people in my community, with my church, with my family, in my neighborhood. And we're going to discern together, how would the Holy Spirit have us respond to the time and place that we are in? It might involve thinking really well and having really good conversations about a traditional Christian sexual ethic. That might be, depending on the place and time you're in, something that really is faithful. It might not be. It might really be an obsession with just the sexual ethic at the expense of all of these other things that are, really important, central parts of the Christian faith. No one can tell you that who's tweeting from a different place in the country or a different time. It really is going to require you listening to how the Holy Spirit is leading you in your time and place.
It does strike me. We have to wrap up. Scott.
I know.
You can't have another thought now.
I'm going to have another thought after we stop.
It does. Whoa. Stick around for a bonus.
The after hours.
A bonus interview with Skye Jitani. It does strike me that most of the people complaining the most about negative world live in the least negative parts of the country.
Absolutely.
And are watching negative world from afar.
Or on Twitter.
Complaining about it.
Right.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming along. Coming to Holy Post Plus. There's lots of new stuff all the time that you'll find fascinating. And also, you're supporting us so we can keep doing this, even though certain negative forces would like to drive us literally out of existence.
Whoa.
We're not very popular with some people in the Christian world.
Who wants to drive us out of existence?
Would you like me to name names?
No, please don't.
Okay, I won't. And we got a great interview. Hang around for it, and we'll see you next time. Bye. This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by Hiya Health. Hey, do you have kids? Do you care about their health? Of course you do. Most kids' vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk kids really shouldn't be eating. That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin for kids. 0 sugar, 0 gummy junk, yet they taste great and are perfect for picky eaters. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diet diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. And we've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you need to go to hiyahealth.com/holypost. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/holypost and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. And thanks to Hiya Health for sponsoring this episode. The Holy Post is sponsored by BetterHelp. We are living in crazy times, and that can be hard on your mental health. Plus, relationship stress, parenting, marriage, and work stress, it all adds up. Well, don't try to handle all this on your own. You can get help from trained professionals. But the economy and tariffs and the price of eggs, adding therapy onto all that feels like a huge investment, and the cost of traditional in-person therapy can be huge, costing anywhere from $100 to $250 per session. Online therapy with BetterHelp can save you, on average, up to 50% for each session. BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served more than 5 million people around the world. It's easy, too. You can join a session with the click of a button to help fit therapy into your busy life. And you can switch therapists at any time. You can do better than just survive these crazy times. Your well-being is worth it. Visit BetterHelp.com/holypost today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/holypost.
Our guest today is an absolute legend. Charlie Peacock is a Billboard chart-topping musical creator, a 6-time Grammy Award-winning music producer, and a 3-time recipient of the Gospel Music Association's Producer of the Year Award. His recordings and productions have exceeded 25 million albums. He's been named by Billboard's Encyclopedia of Recording Producers as one of the 500 most important producers in pop music history. He started out as a young jazz musician in California and then became part of the rise of gospel rock in the 1980s and has moved on to become a genre-busting producer behind such diverse artists as Al Green, Chris Cornell, Audio Adrenaline, The Civil Wars, Switchfoot, and many, many more. He joined Phil to talk about his new memoir, Roots and Rhythm, A Life in Music. And for Holy Post Plus subscribers, there's an extensive bonus interview with Charlie about how he's navigating these strange times, both as an artist and as a follower of Jesus. Here is Phil's conversation with Charlie Peacock.
I'm here with Charlie Peacock. Hi, Charlie.
Hello, Phil.
Charlie is, if you don't know Charlie, I don't know where you've been, although you might be very young, and most of his behind-the-scenes stuff has been more recent, and his upfront stuff was back a few years ago. Your solo career
in the other century
has been a while. Yeah. Charlie Peacock, Billboard chart-topping musical creator, 6-time Grammy Award winner as producer, 3-time recipient of the Gospel Music Association's Producer of the Year Award. Would that come in the form of a dove, a shiny little dove?
It would be a shiny dove.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a few of those somewhere.
I bet you do. I wonder, I'm not sure I got a dove for when Larry sang In the Light, though, but I should have.
I forgot about that.
It's the only cucumber that's ever sang my song.
I forgot about that. Charlie's produced music for film and television, held executive and A&R positions at EMI Universal and Sony Music. Co-founder of the Art House of Wedgwood Circle. He's worked with the One Campaign. That's Bono's social justice campaign. So Bono's been to your house. That's not something everyone can say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a handful of people. Yeah.
Well, but sure. I said not everyone. I didn't say that no one else can say that Bono's been to their house. He's doing interviews, and we're talking to him partly because he has a new memoir that's, is it out? Is it out?
It is.
It's out. It's called Roots and Rhythm, A Life in Music. Mm-hmm. So he also, this is fun stuff. He was the first one to sign Switchfoot to his record label. John Foreman is a constant presence on my playlist for probably 15 years now.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, particularly his solo stuff, particularly the what do you call it? The Seasons cycle? What was that series called?
Yeah, he had Seasons. Yeah.
Okay.
He's got a new one out called Bloom, I think, that he's getting ready to tour on.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. So watch for that.
Fan of John Foreman. Charlie also produced The Civil Wars, which
That's right.
had 2 albums, only 2. Why didn't they make more, Charlie? Yeah, we
did.
Right?
We made a bunch of EPs too. So
did you?
Okay. Yeah. I don't know how many. There's like 5, I think, EPs and 2 full-length albums.
And the second Civil Wars album, produced by Charlie, hit #1 on the Billboard Top 200 list.
Yes.
That's not something you do every day.
No, that is rarefied air for sure.
Did that make your head a little bit big?
Yeah, momentarily, but also I was talking to a rock journalist the other day in an interview, and we were trying to figure out whether I was the only producer in pop music history to have a #1 Billboard album on a non-existing group.
Yeah, that's because there was a duo and they broke up before the album was done.
Before the album came out. Yeah, before it was done. Yeah.
Yeah, as they were breaking up.
And he was pretty confident that I am. So I hold that.
Really?
That #1 spot too.
That's so okay. So it's one thing to say, hey, I produced a #1 album, but you do have something on a layer on top of that.
Yes.
Which may be unique to you.
Right.
And
yes.
then if you overlay that with, and I had Bono in my house.
Yes.
Now I'm pretty sure you're at a dinner party for one.
I love that. Dinner party for one.
Yeah, which is how I spent my high school years. Okay, so you started out as an artist.
Yes.
Charlie Peacock, which is not your real name, is a stage name so that you could get girls. Fake, is that
fake
correct?
Name. It was so people would remember my name.
Oh.
Yeah, I already had a girl. I married her.
Oh, you were married when you became Charlie Peacock? I
was, yeah. Okay. I got married at 18. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I saw somewhere that you're coming up on your 50th wedding anniversary.
That's right. Yeah, in just a couple of months.
Okay. So, had Bono at your house, had a #1 album from a group that didn't exist. And married for 50 years.
That's right.
That is like totally dinner party for one. Okay, so I don't really want to talk a lot about, what was it like to produce this or what was it like to produce that. I'm more interested in your spiritual journey because we have some commonality that we were doing the contemporary Christian. I was making contemporary Christian children's videos while you were making contemporary Christian music. 2 of your albums, I gotta say, Charlie, Everything That's on My Mind and The Secret of Time. If you start any song from either of those albums, I think I could finish it.
Really?
I know those albums so well.
Oh, well, that's great.
Yeah, my wife and I, my wife Lisa, we love those 2 albums. There's some songs on that were really impactful on me.
Well, thank you. I think those are 2 really good records that a lot went into the making of them. Not just the music part, but I mean just the overall simmering and of ideas and design and whatnot.
Yeah. And songs like I Almost Threw It All Away. I was newly married. We were married under difficult circumstances. It was stressful. We were in the period of our marriage, where you've pretty much finished discovering the things you like about each other, and now you're discovering the things you don't like about each other. Like, oh, wow, you hid that well. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I did. But now it's out. And that song, just about how close you can come to throwing away a marriage.
Right.
I think that song was because my dad threw away his marriage when I was 9 and left. And so that song was kind of a rallying point for me to say, no matter how bad it gets, I'm like, true love doesn't come and go. Here today, gone tomorrow. Doesn't say the wicked word that breaks the heart in two. Doesn't renegotiate what it knows is true. Doesn't give up, give in, throw it all away. It's like, okay, I'm hanging on. That's the bridge. I'm hanging on to that. So thank you.
Yes. I probably, thank you for saying that. I've probably received more letters and emails about that song than any song that I've written. Yeah.
Wow.
In terms of that kind of feedback and in particular where people said that, I was already there. I had already crossed the line. I had already said no to it. And I heard this song and we found our way back to each other. And that's such an honor. Such an honor to.
Yeah. It is. It's like the first time I heard that kids were listening to God is Bigger Than the Boogeyman while they were in cancer treatment, and you just go, oh, wow. I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
I was just, I was just trying to make a point while being silly, and I don't realize the point was way bigger than the silly.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the way it is with a lot of our creativity, is that the point of it is way bigger than we imagine, because we're on the initiating part of imagination, and then it travels into, I think, and finds its way into this bigger cosmic imagination, participates in things that we didn't necessarily embed the work with, and that's the spiritual component of it.
Right. God uses things in ways you don't see coming.
Amen.
Okay, here's what I want to get into, because we're both artists, but we've both been involved in the Christian business.
Mm-hmm.
How did it affect your personal spirituality to go from, indie Charlie Peacock, trying to make music, to being in the belly of the beast in Nashville and seeing all these executives chasing money in the name of faith?
I didn't really have, I would say I was pretty shielded from a lot of things when I first moved to Nashville.
Okay.
And I came here really with two objectives. I had been courted by Bill Hearn and Peter York, which was the Sparrow Corporation at the time before it became EMI CMG. And I was courted by Mike Blanton at Reunion and Blanton Harrell Management.
Yeah, I know all of those guys.
Yeah. So Mike wanted me to write a hit song for Amy Grant, which I did.
Which you then obliged.
Yeah, I obliged.
And wrote Every Heartbeat.
Yeah, co-wrote that with her and Wayne, but originally, wrote it and presented it to them, and they finished it. And then Peter and Bill ended up signing me to a recording contract with the idea that when I was out of my publishing arrangement with EMI Music, then I would sign with them and they would publish me as well, and we would do a production deal, and I'd start developing artists and so on and so forth. So for many years, I would say for my first probably first 10 years, it was just one long honeymoon of everything going right and being in great friendship with people and so on and so forth. And then I just got to the point where I really got tired going over the same territory about Christian music not being necessarily the highest and best use of music, which is what most people were promoting it as, because I was much more of a generalist than specific to CCM or Christian music. And I just kept trying to lay out this artistic theology that I just wanted to be God's musical person everywhere and in everything. And it just so happened that at that moment, it was here in Nashville doing this thing with these people who I loved and liked and enjoyed. But once the entertainment corporations had bought all the companies, the exact opposite thing happened than what people anticipated. So just for your listeners, what people anticipated when that happened was that all of a sudden you would have all these people who weren't in the church or in the fellowship of people who were following Jesus, making all these decisions about songs and lyrics and, taking the name of Jesus out of songs and things like that. Well, it was the exact opposite of that. These huge entertainment corporations didn't buy these record labels and production companies and so on and so forth because they wanted to change them. They actually wanted them to become more genre specific and more occupy an entertainment lane, and so that they would own that lane just like they owned a jazz label and a classical label and so on and so forth. So that's when everything broke down for me. When the idea that it was it had to be branded, it had to be genre specific, all of that, that's when I was like, I'm out. I don't do that. That's what I don't do. So that's kind of when we had I wrote a book about it at the Crossroads in 1999. Had debates in GMA, in the context of GMA and lots of different things about it because I was invested in the people and in the process. But ultimately, I had to move on from that. And it just so happened almost immediately after that is when everything blew up for Switchfoot. And we started having our top 40 hits with them.
Yeah. And Switchfoot had kind of the same issue that they hadn't
that's
started.
That's why I signed them, I mean, and credit to Bill Hearn is that he was the one who, and again, this is why, these guys in the suits, so to speak, they were never my enemy. I mean, if we had differences once the sort of genreification of the music was cemented. But prior to that, we found good generative ways to work together. But it was Bill who funded me to do an experiment which had never been done, which was to have two completely different marketing budgets, one for the CCM market and one for the general pop market. And so when Switchfoot was released, when Sarah Mason was released, we took those records to two markets simultaneously because both Steve Taylor and I, we were convinced that crossover was not the thing. Because crossover required you to sell 500,000 units to Christians first in order to gain permission to sell it to anyone else.
Okay.
Right? And I was just like, I don't ask permission from anybody. I make stuff and then try to get it out to the whole world as much as I'm able. But I'm not going to pass somebody's, metric test in order to, give music to my neighbor. So, so that was where, again, that was where a line was drawn in the sand for me and changed things for me. Yeah. And of course, then both Steve with Sixpence None the Richer and me with Switchfoot, we sort of pioneered that first step of that simultaneous distribution as opposed to, achieving something on church level and then taking it to mainstream pop.
Okay. How, as you've gone through this, because then,
you say, okay, let me just challenge you for a minute, because
Yeah,
you had the same challenges.
Uh-huh. Well, I was in control of everything until the day I was in control of nothing.
Okay.
It was like a light switch where my films will say what I want them to say. They will be marketed the way I want them to be marketed. And then once, sales had really taken off, it's like when I will decide what the budget is, and, we will make this as good as I want this to be. And, it will go where I want it to go. And then, because you had an experience, I was thinking about this today, you had an experience with the Civil Wars where you hit the mountaintop that you'd kind of been climbing your whole life, a number one album with the incredibly bittersweet knowledge that there would not be another one.
Right.
That's it. Unfortunately, you've dragged a deceased group up to the mountaintop, and now you have to recognize that they're deceased. And I had a similar experience where for 10 years, I just wanted to make a movie. I want to get to the point where I could make a movie.
Right.
And we finished the movie, Jonah, that took 4 years. And everything we'd learned, everything I had strived for was in that, like, this is it. Yeah. And we had a premiere party for the staff where I and just a couple other people knew the morning after the premiere party, we were shutting down the studio, and that they all thought they were rolling into the next movie. And in reality, it was over, that we had died on the mountaintop.
Yeah.
And that's challenging, especially when it's like, I think this is what God wants me to do. I'm using all my gifts. I'm doing what he wants me to do. Yeah. And now I have a death on the mountaintop. Yeah. What was your spiritual journey like through some of these really wild, ups and downs and reconceptions of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I think I've probably experienced it in all the ways that you and listeners have, and that something really difficult has happened, and it has really strengthened my faith and given me rejuvenated, to the point where I could say, like I just recently said, like, the love of God in Christ Jesus is my steady gig. It's my foundation. It's who I am. And then have a similar experience, and then just be, have my guts just ripped open, and be incapacitated, and just be constantly venting and just mad as hell, and having to deal with all that anger. And so, and every point in between. And I think too, a lot of it for me has been having this particular illness that I have has given me the space, and in a sense that suffering space that is very unique, where you really face your mortality. You face just what a small little person you are, and how needy you are, and how foolish it seems to look, whether you're looking back 3 years or 30 years and say, and I thought I was an empire builder, and I'm just a little broken man.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Charlie, about 8 years ago, were diagnosed with a neurological disorder where you have almost constant headaches.
That's right.
For 8 years. In fact, we were supposed to record this yesterday, but the pain was too much, so we pushed it. Yeah, pushed it today, which is why I'm trying not to yell or get too excited.
Do you normally yell?
Oh, I'm a yeller. Oh, I'm like, Fox News talking head. Oh boy. No, I'm not really a yeller, but I get very animated. What has been your relationship with, you would say, with the American church over the years? You know, what, I mean, like 40 years ago, what did Charlie think the church was about and Christianity was for? And how has that changed over the last 40 years?
Oh, Phil, we don't have enough time. You're going to have to book me for like 10 podcasts. We'll get to chapter 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you a little bit?
Can I a little bit?
I'm curious about people. There are quite a few of our generation, I guess a little younger, that were doing the Christian music thing.
Yeah.
And not only have left the Christian music thing, but have kind of wandered off from Christianity entirely. You know? And I don't know if there's a little bit of it that they were raised in a more fundamentalist background, and and then you become an artist and you're dealing with lots of artistic friends who have suffered under a fundamentalist background, and so you just chuck the whole thing. So I'm curious, when I meet someone who's been in it and in the business of it and is still following Jesus 40 years later.
Well, I will say 40 plus years ago, I was very fortunate because I was never in the Christian thing in terms of the, like the idea that I was entering into this industry to which every thing I said and did was monetized. I didn't have that perspective at all. And it wasn't why I did what I did, never was. I came to Christ playing in a bar, and I continued to do that.
Playing bars or come to Christ? Yeah,
playing bars at theaters and all of that. And even when I was first working with a church that was helping to fund me out in California and fund my artist career and help me with touring and whatnot. I mean, that was always my mission, was to stay where I was, and I did get involved in different aspects of contemporary Christian music and things that I enjoyed, things that I didn't enjoy, and I just edited those things out. And those voices that I didn't think were congruent with my understanding of my very limited understanding of Christianity and particularly the Bible, I edited them out too. And I was very fortunate to have most of my influences come from Europe and come from the UK. And
Christian influences
Christian influences. Okay. Yeah. I didn't have any Christian music influences.
Okay.
So I didn't grow up with Christian music.
You weren't listening to Larry Norman around the turntable?
I was not listening to Larry Norman.
Okay.
I did not even know who Larry Norman was until after I became a Christian. But I did know who T-Bone Burnett was, and Stephen Souls, and Bob Dylan, and other folks that were were making some sort of profession of following Christ. And so I knew that it was out there. I knew who Jesus freaks were. I knew about baptisms in the ocean. I knew about various West Coast kind of happenings that were out there. But more so, I was just fortunate to be around people who were raised on the Inklings, and they were more apt to have the influence of say the expats like the Schaeffers, from L'Abri in Switzerland, and those kind of influences, which made a huge difference, to me, the way I started, because I didn't start with the music is here to be a magnet to draw people into a room for evangelism model. I started with the model of that music needs no apologetic for itself. God allowed it in his creation. It's come to be. He has endorsed it, blessed it, and it is a vocational calling for people, for all people, but specifically for his people. And, the whole model for me was Bezalel in the making of the temple. When God called Bezalel, it was because he had skill and ability and the Spirit of God. And so that showed me immediately that I could continue on this sort of muso route that I'd been on, which was to incrementally grow as a musician and as a composer. And instead, the other story that I was hearing was, there's no use wasting your time on that. Just come up with a simple, 3-minute, 3-chord strumming song, and let's get to praising Jesus, right? Because he's coming back any minute. Mm-hmm. And so why study? Why become the greatest in the world?
There's no time to hone your craft.
Yeah.
We got to crank stuff out.
Yeah. So you see what I'm saying? I was just really fortunate I may have heard those things, but I immediately had other narratives that would cancel those things out.
Okay. So to a certain extent, your outsider upbringing inoculated you a bit, or gave you different influences, so you had different voices in your head to counter.
Yeah, because I came to following Jesus with a whole 15 years worth of stories that defined me. I mean, as I say in the book, so much of the way I thought of an artist was because I read so much beat poetry and read the beat novelists like Kerouac and so forth. And those people were also in Northern California, and the Pulitzer Prize winning poet Gary Snyder just lived up the road from us. And, so it was like I had models of artistry in those guys, which was very much, anti-status quo. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, at one point I had someone in leadership at our church in Warehouse Ministries in Sacramento that I was a part of say to me, you have a really rebellious nature. And I said, yeah, I mean, what? Well, that's not new news. It's like I'm an autodidact. I left high school when I was 16. I've been married since I was 18. You ought to know by now who you're talking to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
is that, you think that's served you well in surviving as an artist all these years? Oh,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's both, served me well and nearly killed me. So, it's yeah. I mean, hypervigilance is a great way to keep from getting eaten by a tiger, but it's not necessarily a great way to live for 40 or 50 years. Well,
that's probably its own podcast episode right there. Mm-hmm. The impact of hypervigilance.
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's a great driver for creativity. It's a great driver for it.
I need to think about that.
Yeah.
Am I hypervigilant?
You always have material, Phil. If you see everything, feel everything, analyze everything, you always have material. That's why you would never ever hear me saying I was blocked creatively or want for ideas. And hypervigilant.
Right, my art is blocked. My art gets blocked financially, not creatively.
Yes, exactly.
I want to make this, but the money isn't there.
Yeah.
What are you doing? I don't want to take too much more of your time. And I do want people to check out your book, Roots and Rhythm, A Life in Music, because you can probably tell Charlie is a thoughtful man, not a superficial man, and also an excellent writer. I mean, you can just sit with some of his lyrics and like, wow, I'm not even sure I need the music. on this. This is, this is good stuff. I don't know if you'd call it beat poetry or what you'd call it. What are you?
Definitely literary influence for sure.
I really appreciate the time, Charlie.
Well, thank you for giving me, some of your time.
Yeah. Well, this is what we do to build our platforms, Charlie, so we can have more impressions, Charlie.
What interview will I be? Will I be 667 or?
I don't know. They don't tell me that.
As long as I'm not 666.
Charlie's book is called Roots and Rhythm, A Life in Music. It is available now. Go check it out. Where can they just see what else you're up to? Where should they look for? Art House? Should they look for? Do you have your own website? If they go
to charliepeacock.com, they can find everything they've ever wanted to know.
Oh my
including,
gosh.
Like a full discography. Like I just got an email today from someone who made me super happy because they said, I've never heard of your music before. And I was like, this is great.
Wow. Welcome. Come on in.
Yeah, come on in because you've got a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah. You've written some great stuff. You've produced some great stuff. You continue to write some great stuff, including, as you can probably tell from listening to Charlie, this book isn't just, here's the 20 albums I produced and how I produced them. It's much richer. Much richer. I was going to say more cinematic, which is kind of
well, thank you. That would be a great term. Yeah. Anyway. Well, I'm a big Joan Didion fan. And I kind of tried to channel her a little bit.
Okay.
In it.
Will you keep writing? Or do you think you would ever do another book?
I wouldn't do another memoir.
Well, yeah.
But I don't like publishing. I don't like publishing books.
Okay.
Because we'd have to do another pod. No, because we'd have to do just a podcast on that about how much I dislike, how broken I think that book publishing is.
Yeah, that's a different sticky wicket.
Yeah.
Right
so
there.
we cover that another time. While I'm also saying thank you to Erdman's because they have been a fantastic publisher. So.
Thanks, Erdman's. We work with Erdman's a lot. We like those guys. And there are a few good ones that we really enjoy working with. Charlie Peacock, thanks for being on. We'll keep you in our prayers for your health and your creativity and your kids. And you have grandkids now, 4?
I do. I have 4 of them.
I have 2.
Yeah.
4.
Congrats.
Did they ever watch VeggieTales?
They did.
They
yes.
did? Okay.
Yeah.
How are
2
they?
of them did. 2 of them did.
All right.
The 21-year-old and the 18-year-old did.
Oh, yeah. They're a little old for VeggieTales, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, well. All right. Thanks, man. And
all right. Take care.
Hope to talk to you later. The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.